The rain hadn't started yet, but downtown Austin carried that metallic weight in the air just before a storm, the kind that hushed the valets and pressed the whole street into waiting. Jake Calloway was driving his rival home. Sloan Mercer, 32, the CEO, who had outmaneuvered him in 3 boardrooms that year, sat in his passenger seat with her forehead against the cold window, crying so quietly the city outside never noticed. He hadn't spoken in almost 20 minutes. A single father with a 7-year-old asleep at home and a babysitter waiting on his couch. He had no reason to be the one taking her back to her apartment. But the way her hand trembled around her phone kept his foot steady on the wheel. And when she knocked on his door the next morning, mascara dried into thin black rivers along her jaw, he finally understood what that silence had been. Until that night, Jake Calloway had only ever read Sloan Mercer in conference rooms. He had learned her the way a man learns the weather of a place he keeps having to fly into the small lift of her chin when she disagreed, the 2 short taps of her pen against a legal pad just before she dismantled someone's argument. 2 years of competing against her had taught him that much. 2 years of standing across boardroom tables in Austin, watching her unwind his proposals with the patience of a person who had decided very early in life that she would never lose anything she wanted. People in their industry called her the woman who never broke. He had once believed that. His own work lived in a glass building on Congress Avenue, the kind of company that wrote quietly profitable software and let louder firms have the headlines. He was the chief strategy officer there, which on most days meant he sat in rooms and asked the questions everyone else was too tired to ask. Sloan ran her own outfit 3 blocks north, a venture-backed startup that had spent the past 18 months eating market share off competitors twice its age. They had crossed paths at industry panels, at vendor mixers, at the kind of city dinners where everyone shook hands and meant none of it. She had always been polite to him. She had also always won. What kept him sharp through any of it was Theo. His son was 7 blonde, at the crown brown everywhere else, and had inherited his late mother's old habit of asking impossible questions over breakfast. Why is the sky farther away in winter? Why do grown-ups say sorry when they don't mean it? Jake had been raising him alone for almost 4 years now, ever since Caroline had decided that a husband who lived inside his work was no husband at all. She had not been wrong. He had learned that lesson the hard way, and what was left of it lived in a small framed photograph on Theo's nightstand, Caroline, in a yellow sundress, holding their son when he was still small enough to fit inside one arm. The Harwell account was supposed to change the shape of things. Harwell Group was a multi-state logistics conglomerate out of Dallas, looking for a technology partner to overhaul its internal systems. The contract was worth tens of millions over 5 years. Every firm in Texas had wanted a piece. By the end of October, the field had narrowed to 2 finalists, his company and hers. Harwell announced a partnership dinner on the 2nd Thursday of November. Both finalists were invited ostensibly to meet the board in a relaxed setting. In practice, every dinner of that kind was an audition with cutlery. Jake arrived 4 minutes late. Theo had refused to sleep. His son had spent the better part of an hour negotiating for one more book, one more glass of water, one more reason for his father not to go anywhere. By the time the babysitter, a quiet college student named Megan from down the hall, had taken over, Jake was already adjusting his tie in the elevator. The hotel sat at the southern edge of downtown, a glass tower, whose marble lobby always smelled faintly of orchids. The private dining room on the 18th floor had been set for 16. He saw Sloan the moment he walked in. She wore a charcoal suit that fit her like it had been measured in a quiet room. Her hair was pulled back. She held a glass of sparkling water in one hand and was nodding at something Harwell's chief financial officer was telling her, the kind of nod that meant she had already heard a more interesting version from someone else. Her eyes met his for exactly the length of a heartbeat as he entered. Then she returned to her conversation as if he had not arrived at all. He took the seat across the table from her. The candles were too tall. The wine was too good. The first course came and went, and Jake watched Sloane do what she always did, speak less than everyone else, and somehow leave the impression she had said the most. Then halfway through the second course, her phone vibrated against the white linen. She glanced down. Her face did something he had never seen before. It lasted less than a second. A tightening at the corner of her mouth, a flicker behind the eyes, and then the mask slid back into place so smoothly that the man beside her mid-anecdote about a hunting trip never broke stride. She set the phone face down on the linen. She picked up her wine glass. She had not been drinking wine before that moment. He noticed, because that was the kind of thing he had trained himself to notice: small adjustments, small departures from a person's pattern. By the end of the second course, her glass had been refilled twice. By dessert, 3 times. She was still articulate, still composed, still nodding at the right moments. But there was something happening underneath, and he could feel it the way one feels. Weather changing inside a building. Harwell's chairman gave a short toast somewhere around 9:40. People clapped politely. The dinner began its slow dissolution into handshakes and exchanged business cards. Sloane rose, offered the chairman's wife a brief smile, and walked toward the door. On the threshold of the dining room, her right heel caught barely the smallest hitch of a woman who had just realized her body was not entirely her own anymore. She caught the doorframe with 2 fingers and corrected herself. The chairman's wife was already turning away. Jake set down his napkin and stood. He found her at the elevators. She was pressing the button with the heel of her hand because her fingers were not cooperating. She did not look at him as he approached. "There's press waiting at the front entrance," Jake said quietly. Harwell tipped them about the dinner. 2 photographers, maybe 3. Her jaw moved. She said nothing. "There's a service door on the east side that goes out to the loading bay. I can walk you out that way." "I don't need an escort, Mr. Calloway." "I know." The elevator opened. She stepped inside. A few seconds later, he stepped in after her. They rode down without speaking. On the ground floor, instead of turning toward the lobby, he led the way through a corridor, marked staff, only past a kitchen full of clanging steel, and out through a back door into a covered loading bay, where the air was sharp and damp. A photographer in a black windbreaker stood at the corner, his camera already half raised. He had guessed the back exit, too. Jake stepped between Sloane and the lens. "Not tonight," he said. The photographer lowered the camera halfway. "Calloway, come on. I'm just doing my job." "And I'm just asking you to do it tomorrow?" Something passed between the 2 men in that small wedge of streetlight on the concrete. The photographer looked at Sloane, then at Jake, then shrugged, turned, and walked back toward the front of the building. Jake's car was parked 2 blocks east. He did not ask whether she wanted a ride. He simply began walking, and after a moment she followed. She slid into the passenger seat without a word. He started the engine. The dashboard clock read 10:04. Somewhere across town, Theo was asleep with his arm around the stuffed elephant he had owned since he was 3 years old, and Megan was probably watching something on her laptop with the volume turned low. Jake pulled out of the parking space. Sloane gave him her address, a building on the west side near Lady Bird Lake, and then she leaned her head against the cold glass of the passenger window, closed her eyes, and stopped pretending. He drove without speaking. The city slid past in long ribbons of red and amber. At one of the lights, he glanced over and realized she was crying. Not the kind of crying meant to be seen. The kind that happens when a person has been holding something for so long that their body finally insists on letting a small part of it out. She did not wipe her face. She did not apologize. She did not seem to know he had noticed. The light turned green. He kept driving. When they reached her building, she gathered herself the way someone gathers spilled paper quickly, with a quiet fury at the gathering itself. She looked at him for the first time since they had left the hotel. Her eyes were red, but very direct. "Don't tell anyone," she said. Her voice was hoarse. "Tell anyone that I couldn't hold it." She opened the door, stepped out and crossed the sidewalk toward the lobby without looking back. He waited at the curb until he heard the soft click of the building's glass door locking behind her. Then he sat there another full minute, both hands resting on the wheel before he put the car in drive and turned toward home. The drive back across town took 22 minutes. He let himself in quietly, paid Megan in cash, and watched her gather her backpack and disappear down the hallway. The apartment smelled like the cinnamon toast Theo had insisted on before bed. He stood in the doorway of his son's room for a long moment, listening to the small, even breathing of a child who still believed his father had everything under control. He should have slept. Instead, he sat on the edge of his own bed in the dark jacket, still on replaying the look on Sloane Mercer's face when she had said the words, "I couldn't hold it," and trying to understand why a woman he had spent 2 years competing against had in the space of an evening become someone he could not stop thinking about as a person. He did not yet know that in less than 9 hours she would be standing on his front step. He must have fallen asleep at some point, because the next thing he registered was light at the edges of the curtains and the soft sound of Theo singing to himself in the next room. He sat up, took off the jacket he had slept in, and walked into the kitchen. He put on a fresh pot of coffee. He sliced bread. He cracked 2 eggs into a pan because Theo had decided 3 weeks ago that scrambled eggs were the only acceptable breakfast for a serious person. And Jake was, in his son's view, sometimes a serious person. The clock on the microwave read 7:41. The knock came at 7:43. 3 short raps, low and uncertain. Jake set down the spatula. Through the peephole, he saw Sloane Mercer standing on the welcome mat in the same coat she had been wearing the night before, her hair pulled into a hasty knot at the back of her head. No makeup except the dried trace of mascara along the curve of her jaw. He opened the door. For a moment, neither of them spoke. She was holding her keys in one hand, the way a person holds something that is not strictly necessary, but that gives them somewhere to put their fingers. "I didn't know where else to go," she said. He stepped aside. She crossed the threshold slowly, as if she were not entirely certain she had been invited in. The apartment was small but tidy, a living room that opened onto the kitchen, a hallway that led to 2 bedrooms, a window that looked out onto the rooftops of East Austin. She was looking at all of it. He realized she had never been inside the home of a man she competed against, and that she was not quite sure how to be a guest in one. "Coffee?" he asked. "Please." He poured her a mug. He did not ask whether she took it with anything, because she struck him as the kind of person who took it black, and he turned out to be right. She wrapped both hands around the mug and lowered herself onto one of the stools at the kitchen island. That was when Theo came around the corner. He was barefoot in his pajamas, printed with small green dinosaurs, his hair sticking up in 3 different directions, and he stopped in the doorway of the kitchen the moment he saw the stranger sitting at his island. "Dad," he said carefully. "Who is this?" Sloane looked at Jake. Jake looked at Sloane. Neither of them had an answer prepared. "This is Miss Mercer," Jake said. "She works at another company. She needed to talk to me about something. Her name is Sloane." Theo considered this with the gravity of a small judge. Then he padded across the linoleum, climbed up onto the stool next to her, and reached for the piece of toast that was waiting on his plate. "Hi," he said, not looking at her. "I'm Theo. I'm 7. "Hello, Theo." Sloane's voice was different than it had been a moment earlier, softer. "I'm 32. Theo absorbed this and bit into his toast. "That's old," he announced. "Thank you." Jake set a plate of scrambled eggs in front of his son. He glanced at Sloane and saw for the first time since he had met her the corner of her mouth turn up in something that was almost a smile. The kind of smile a person produces involuntarily before they remember they have decided not to. Theo ate his eggs. He asked Sloane whether she had a dog. She did not. Whether she had ever been to the aquarium downtown. She had not. Whether she knew that dolphins had to think about breathing on purpose because they did not do it automatically like people. She did not. Sloane answered each question with the careful seriousness of someone speaking to a small foreign dignitary, and Jake stood by the stove, watching the two of them holding his mug, and feeling something inside his chest do a quiet thing it had not done in a long time. When Theo was finished, he asked to be excused. He wandered back toward his bedroom. Soft cartoon voices began to murmur through the wall a minute later. Sloane set down her mug. "You have a son," she said. "I do." "I didn't know." "You wouldn't have. I don't bring him up at work." She nodded slowly. She looked down at her hands. "I'm sorry to come here like this." "You're not." "I am. You're here because something happened. You wouldn't be here otherwise. So tell me." She breathed in. He watched her decide. "We lost Harwell," she said. Jake set his mug down on the counter. "All of us," she added. "Not just you to me or me to you. Harwell's parent company killed the external partnership track sometime in the last 48 hours. They're consolidating everything in-house. The deal is dead." That was the call I got at dinner. He worked through it. Months of bid preparation. The pitch decks his team had stayed late to perfect, gone in a single internal memo from a Dallas conference room. He felt the loss the way a person feels a step that is not there at the bottom of a staircase. Not pain exactly, but a sudden absence where something had been. "That's not why you're here," he said. "No." "Tell me the rest." She looked at him for a long time. She seemed to be measuring whether he was the kind of person who would use the next sentence against her. He could see her making the decision in real time, and he could see the moment it tipped. "My board has been looking for a reason to replace me for about 6 months, she said. "There's a man on it named Preston Hale. He's 54. He has wanted to be the kind of chief executive who runs a company like mine since long before I was even in the conversation. He has decided very quietly that I am the problem standing between him and the seat he wants. And Harwell was my answer. If I closed Harwell, the board could not have removed me without looking foolish. Now I have nothing to put in front of them. And Preston has 6 months of patience he's been saving up." She lifted the mug and drank again. Her hand was steady this time. The hand of someone who had stopped trying to hide that it had been unsteady the night before. "I built that company," she said. "I built it from a shared document and a phone number. I built it because I had something to prove, and I will not pretend otherwise. I am not interested in losing it to a man whose only qualification is that he looks the way certain people think a chief executive is supposed to look." Jake leaned against the counter. "Why did you come here?" he asked, "instead of to one of your own people?" She looked at him. "Because you saw me last night," she said, "and you didn't take a picture." She left a little before 8. He walked her to the door. She did not thank him a second time. She did not need to. The way she looked at him before she stepped out into the hallway said the thing more clearly than any sentence she could have arranged. He did not see her again for 4 days. She sent one text on Sunday afternoon that said only, "Thank you," and nothing else. He did not write back because he could not think of a sentence that did not feel like an intrusion. He took Theo to the park instead. He stood with the other parents at the edge of the playground and watched his son climb the rope structure in his blue sneakers, and he thought about a woman he had only seen smile once. On Monday, his phone began to ring. The first call was from a board member at his own company who wanted to know casually what exactly had happened at the Harwell dinner on Thursday. The second was from a journalist he had spoken to twice in his career. The third was from a partner at a venture firm in Houston who asked half-joking whether Jake was about to make an announcement. By Monday afternoon, the rumor had a shape. There were no photographs. There was no recording. There was only a sentence repeated in slightly different forms across enough inboxes and group chats that it began to feel like fact. The chief executive of one of Austin's fastest-growing startups had lost composure at the Harwell event and had been escorted out by her direct competitor under circumstances that nobody could quite explain. Some versions of the rumor suggested she had been visibly drunk. Some suggested she had been crying. Some suggested that the two of them had been seen leaving together, and that perhaps the competition between their companies had been less of a competition than the market had been led to believe. He recognized the architecture of it immediately. It was not a leak, it was a construction project. Preston Hale was building a case. By Tuesday morning, one of Jake's mid-size clients quietly postponed a meeting that had been on the calendar for 6 weeks. By Tuesday evening, Theo came home from school and asked in the tone of a child reporting something he did not yet understand why his teacher had asked him whether his dad had a new friend. Jake stood very still in the kitchen for a long moment after his son went to his room. Then he picked up his phone. He almost called her. He almost did. Instead, he set the phone face down on the counter, opened the cabinet beside the refrigerator, and looked at the framed wedding photograph he kept on the second shelf. Caroline and himself at the courthouse 12 years earlier, neither of them yet 30. Both of them smiling like they had figured something out. He had not been able to hang the photo on a wall. He had not been able to throw it away either. Some part of him had understood, for a long time now, that the picture was a receipt for a debt he still owed. The debt was simple. Caroline had needed him to step in once, when stepping in would have cost him something professionally, a promotion, a project he could not now remember which, and he had not done it. He had told himself at the time that he was being responsible. He had told himself a great many things at the time. He closed the cabinet. Sloane's board met on Wednesday afternoon. He did not hear from her until almost 10 that night. By then, he had put Theo to bed twice, once for the official bedtime, and once after his son had crept out claiming a stomachache that turned out to be a desire for company. Jake was sitting at the kitchen island with a single light on, working through email he had not been able to focus on all day. The phone vibrated against the counter, her name on the screen. He picked up. "How bad?" he said. She breathed out on the other end. He could hear traffic in the background. She was outside somewhere. "He has the 4 he needs," she said. "The vote is Friday." "Where are you?" "On the sidewalk outside the office. I came out to call you. I didn't want to do it inside." He closed his laptop. "Talk." There was a long sound on the line that was not quite a breath and not quite a word. When she spoke again, her voice had a quality it had not had in his kitchen 4 days earlier. The mask was not just down. The mask was gone. "I went into that room today," she said, "with 17 pages of data, quarterly numbers, retention metrics, 3 years of growth that does not happen by accident. I walked them through every one of them. And Preston Hale sat there and let me finish. And then he said one sentence. He said, 'We are not questioning Miss Mercer's competence. We are questioning whether she is in a stable position to lead this company through the next year.'" And 4 of the board members nodded at the same time. They did not even look at each other. They had already decided what nodding meant. "Kububu." Jake did not interrupt. "He didn't have to prove anything," she continued. "He just had to make them wonder. And he made them wonder, using a night I didn't choose with a man I'm supposed to be competing against in a city where everyone knows everyone. Sloane. My father," she said, "thought I should have been a lawyer." He went quiet on his end. "He thought it suited my temperament," she continued. "He thought it was a more reasonable life. When I started the company, he told me I was going to work myself into the ground for the privilege of being told no by men who had already decided. He said it kindly. He was not a cruel man. He was just a man who had decided very early that I was the kind of daughter who needed to be protected from her own ambition." She made a small sound that might have been a laugh if it had not been carrying so much. "He died in March," she said. "Last March. He never saw a single quarter of the numbers I walked the board through today. He died believing I was going to fail at this, and he loved me. And that is the part that is the part." She did not finish the sentence. Jake listened to her breathing on the sidewalk on the other side of the city. He listened to a car horn somewhere behind her. He listened to the small, involuntary catch in her throat that she was trying with the discipline of a person who had built a life on discipline to control. "Sloane," he said, "I have never told anyone that. I know. I don't know why I told you. I do." He looked at the closed cabinet beside the refrigerator. He looked at the hallway that led to his son's room. He thought about the night he had let his wife walk out of his apartment because answering her had felt at the time like losing the argument. "You told me," Jake said, "because you finally met someone who isn't going to use it." There was silence on the line, not the silence of someone who had hung up. The silence of someone who had been holding the phone away from her face for a moment. "The vote is Friday," she said again, quieter. "I heard you the first time. Don't do anything. Sloane, I mean it. This is my fight. Don't do anything. All right? Jake, I heard you." She hung up. He sat at the island for a long time after that. The pot of coffee had gone cold hours ago. Down the hall, Theo had finally fallen asleep. Somewhere across the city, Sloane Mercer was walking back into a building where men in good suits had already begun to decide whether her career was a story they wanted to keep telling. He had told her he would not do anything. He had told her the truth when he said it, but sitting alone in the dark of his kitchen with the photograph of his ex-wife behind a cabinet door, he rarely opened. He understood clearly the way a person understands a thing he has been resisting for a long time, that he was going to break that promise before the sun came up on Friday. He waited until Thursday morning. The vote was Friday at 2 in the afternoon. He had been awake for most of the night working out the architecture of what he was about to do, the kind of architecture that, if he got it wrong, would end his own career as cleanly as it might save hers. He could not approach the directors loyal to Preston. They had already made up their minds. He could not approach the ones loyal to Sloane. Either she had told him to stay out, and if any of them mentioned his name to her before Friday, she would never forgive him. Whatever he did, it had to live in the seam between the two groups. That seam was two people. Sloane's board had 7 members. 4 were leaning toward Preston Hale. 1 was Sloane herself. The other 2 were independent directors, outsiders the board had brought in years earlier for the appearance of structure, and who had stayed on out of curiosity more than ambition. Margaret Whitfield, a retired retail executive who lived in a tall house out near Lake Travis. Daniel Brennan, a former chief financial officer of a public company in San Antonio. He called Brennan first. He did not pretend to be calling on Sloane's behalf. He said plainly that he was the chief strategy officer of one of her direct competitors, that he had been the man with her at the Harwell event, and that there was a story circulating about that evening that did not match what he had personally witnessed. He asked for 15 minutes. He offered to come to him. Brennan agreed to meet at 10 that morning at a coffee shop in North Austin. Margaret Whitfield agreed to meet him at 11:30 at her house on the condition that he keep it short. He told both of them the same thing. He told them about a phone call that had visibly altered Sloane Mercer's face, about a photographer who had been waiting in the loading bay, and about a woman who had walked past him without ever giving him a usable image, about what she had carried in the car beside him without ever asking him to carry any part of it for her. He told them that he had no personal interest in the outcome of any vote, that he was not in any way involved with Miss Mercer professionally or otherwise, and that he had decided to speak to them only because the alternative was watching a man use the worst night of someone's career as a tool to take her seat. Brennan listened without writing anything down. Margaret Whitfield wrote 3 short lines in a notebook with a fountain pen, and then looked up at him. "Why," she said, "are you doing this?" He had spent half the night preparing an answer. None of his answers had survived, so he gave her the only one he had left. "Because I have spent 2 years trying very hard to beat her," he said, "and I would like to beat her on a day when she is at her best. Not on a day when a man like Preston Hale is allowed to decide what her worst night meant." She closed the notebook. "All right, Mr. Calloway." He was home by 12:15. By 12:40 his phone rang. It was Sloane. He answered, and she did not say hello. You went to Margaret Whitfield. I did. You went to Daniel Brennan. I did. I told you not to do anything. I know. There was a sound on the other end, like a person standing up too fast. Then her voice came back low and shaking, and not in the way it had shaken on the sidewalk on Wednesday night. This was something different. You don't have the right to do that. This is my fight. Mine. Do you understand what you have just made me look like to the only two people on that board who weren't already in someone's pocket? I know what it looks like. Do you? Sloan, I have spent 10 years building a company that does not need a man to stand between me and a photographer. 10 years making sure no one in any room I walk into can say I got there because someone helped me. And you walk into the homes of my own directors the day before the vote, and you tell them the story of a night I didn't want them to know about at all. I told them what was true. That isn't the point. I know it isn't the point. Then why? He had not closed the door of his apartment when she had called. He realized that now, because he could hear his own breathing in the quiet of the hallway, and he could hear that hers had been doing the same thing. Because I couldn't stand outside, he said, and watch Preston Hale use a night you did everything right to destroy you. That's why. The line stayed open. He could not tell whether she was still on it. Then he heard the soft sound of a door closing on her end, and the background hum of her office gave way to the smaller hum of her breathing. My whole life, she said, every time I have let someone in, they have used it. Every single time. Investors' mentors, the man I almost married when I was 26. Every time. So I built something that did not require me to let anyone in, and it worked. It worked. And now you have made the people on my board think a man came to my rescue. He waited until he was certain she had finished. My wife left me. He said quietly, because I never let her in. I learned the same lesson, Sloan. I learned it the other way. And I have spent 4 years raising a small boy, alone, because I was too proud, at 34 years old, to let the woman I loved help me carry one bad year. The line was quiet again. I am not doing this to rescue you, he said. I am doing it because I have stood outside one life already, and I am not going to do it twice. A small sound came from down the hallway. He turned. Theo was standing at the end of the corridor in his pajamas, holding the stuffed elephant by one ear, his hair flattened on one side from his pillow. He was rubbing one eye with the back of his fist. Dad, are you okay? Jake lowered the phone from his ear and pressed it against his chest for a moment. I'm okay, buddy. I'm talking to a friend. Theo blinked at him. Then his eyes drifted to the phone, and Jake watched his son put two things together at the speed only a child's brain can put two things together. Is it Sloan? Yeah. Is she okay? Jake did not know what to say to that. He looked at the phone in his hand and then lifted it slowly back to his ear. Did you hear that? He said. I heard. Her voice had broken on something between the first word and the second. He asked if you were okay. I heard Jake. What do I tell him? There was a long silence on her end. Then a sound that he understood after a moment was the sound of a woman in a closed office leaning her forehead against a wall. Tell him, she said, that I'm going to be okay. The vote was at 2 on Friday. He did not hear anything until almost 4. By then, he had walked Theo to school, come back, opened his laptop 3 separate times without writing a single email, and ended up on the small balcony of his apartment in the cold afternoon sun, watching the cars on the street below. His phone rang. He picked up. 4-3, Sloan said. He closed his eyes. You kept it. I kept it. Margaret Whitfield asked Preston in front of the whole board where he had gotten his information about that night. He didn't have an answer. Brennan asked him whether he had verified any of it. He didn't have an answer to that either. By the time it came to a vote, One of the directors who had been leaning toward him had decided he did not want to be associated with whatever Preston had been doing in the last week. And Preston, there's going to be an internal review of his conduct. I don't think he survives it. He did not say anything for a moment. He could hear her breathing on the other end, and it was not the breathing of someone who had just won. It was the breathing of someone who had just been allowed to keep something. "Where are you?" "In the parking garage, sitting in my car." "Are you going to be okay?" "I'm going to be okay." 3 weeks later, both of their companies were invited separately, and then together to bid on a smaller engagement out of Houston, a joint advisory project that neither of them would have looked twice at 6 months earlier. They took the meeting together. They won it together. It was not Harwell. It was not tens of millions of dollars. It was the first thing either of them had built without trying to take it away from the other one. On a Tuesday afternoon in late January, Sloane parked her car outside Theo's school at 2:45 and waited at the gate beside Jake. She did not have a professional reason to be there. She had simply 2 days earlier asked whether she could come. Theo came around the corner with his backpack dragging on the pavement. He saw her and stopped walking for a moment. Then he ran the last 20 feet. 2 years later, the two companies announced a merger. The press conference was held in the lobby of the building on Congress Avenue, the same lobby Jake had walked through every morning for the better part of a decade. Sloane stood beside him at the podium in a navy suit. There was a small ring on her left hand that the cameras had not yet noticed. A reporter near the back raised her hand and asked, "When did the two of you actually start collaborating?" Jake glanced at Sloane. She took the microphone. "When I stopped trying to win alone," she said. He leaned toward the second microphone. He said it more quietly than the first one because he meant it for her more than for the room. "And when I stopped thinking being a single dad meant doing everything alone." In the front row in the seat, Sloane had insisted on saving for him. A boy with hair that still stuck up in 3 different directions raised his hand. He was 9 now. He said loud enough for the room to hear. "Is Sloane your rival now?" The room laughed. Jake looked at Sloane. She was already smiling. He had driven her home in silence on a Thursday in November, not because he had wanted anything from her. He had done it because it had been in that small, unwitnessed moment the right thing to do. He had not known then that the right thing in a small moment was often where everything truly began. He knew it now.